the tumah to a kohen. There's a mitzvah separating challah from dough, and you give challah to a kohen. In Chutz La'aretz, it's only a din derabanan to be mafresh challah, that we shouldn't forget the mitzvah of challah, lo tishtakach teiros challah. So we're mafresh challah and we burn it. But if you have challah that's deiraisa in Eretz Yisrael, you give it to a kohen. If he's tahar and it's tahar, is manenu challah chutz la'aretz is also derabanan, and there we also burn it. That's already dinim derabanan. But the din deiraisa of challah, if you meet the requirements in Eretz Yisrael, would be to give challah to kehana. The Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs has kollel, he has rules of how do you count the mitzvahs. As we know, there are 613 mitzvahs. The 613 mitzvahs is really not the sum total of all the mitzvahs. The Rambam says there are thousands of mitzvahs, but some of them are parts of larger mitzvahs. For example, a person brings a korban. So you shech the korban, the kohen catches the blood, you walk with the blood, you zayrik the blood, you burn the fats of the animal. There are different chalakim of that mitzvah. The Rambam says when it comes to counting the mitzvahs, the taryag mitzvahs, we're going to count certain mitzvahs as one mitzvah, even though it has many different parts. So when you look at the mitzvahs in the Torah, you can't always figure out what counts as a mitzvah from taryag and what's a chelik of one of those mitzvahs. So the Rambam says you can have many mitzvahs which are part of a larger mitzvah. And the Rambam says we don't count chalakim of mitzvahs as separate mitzvahs, otherwise it would be thousands. We have a Kabbalah, the Gemara says that there are 613, and the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs, and really his whole Yada Chazaka is structured in a way that he's giving us the skeleton of the Torah, the outline, the 613 mitzvahs. And if you look in every section in the Rambam, he always writes at the beginning of every section, these are the mitzvahs in this section, and then all the halachas. So you'll have numerous mitzvahs in those halachas, but there's only whatever number of mitzvahs there are because they become the klolim. That's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says you can have branches, and you have the tree, the branches, and then continual branches. So we have taryag, shoroshim, and from each shayrish you can have many mitzvahs. So the Rambam says in his Hagdama to Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Sefer HaMitzvahs is really the Hagdama to the Yad Chazaka. And in the beginning of the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he has his shoroshim, his rules of how he came about to the cheshbon of 613 mitzvahs. So one of the things he writes here is, Ein roi limnois chelkei malacha min ha-malachis, shebo hatzivoi basiyasa kol chelik v'chelik b'fnei atzmo. He says, you don't count every single piece of a mitzvah. You can have a mitzvah that has many parts. When it comes to minyan, we'll count it as one. So there are many different examples the Rambam brings, and the Ramban is bothered with some of the Rambam's division. So the Rambam says, I'll give you a mashal, a korban oila. The korban oila, you have shchita, you have shita, you skin it, you cut it up, throw the blood, burn the fat, burn the basar, etc. The Rambam says you don't count every single chelik as a separate mitzvah. There's one mitzvah, bringing a korban oila. Included in the Rambam's description, the Rambam says, you'll take all these, by each korban, you take, he says, Hayais al toida b'lechem b'bilti lechem l'kichas ha'kayim menu ha'chazav v'shoykut ha'nafasai. Certain parts go to the kohen. That's a part of a mitzvah. The part that the kohen gets, that's a chelik of a mitzvah. So the Ramban writes that I'm agreeing and disagreeing with the Rambam. I agree with the Rambam, there's a rule that you don't count parts of a mitzvah. But there's an example, like the Ramban, of where I don't agree with the Rambam, is how the Rambam looks at the mitzvah of Challah. When the Rambam brings the mitzvah of Truma, or he brings the mitzvah of Challah, so the Rambam says there's a mitzvah called Truma, and there's a mitzvah called Challah. So the Rambam writes,
which mitzvah is that?
so let's see which number it is. I think it's Shini again. Let's see, where's the assay? Should be, let's see where I can find it here. Find where the assay is. The Rambam has a series. Here it is. The Rambam writes in, let's start. Yes. It's starting with Kuf Chaf, he has. Starting with Kuf Yates. Neter Avai, Peya, Leket, Shikcha, Eidlois. Then he has Bikurim, Kuf Chavav. Sivana lahaitzi truma gedayla. Amr reishes the gancha titain lay. That's the mitzvah. Kuf chav zayin. Meiser rishay. You give it to the Levi. That's a mitzvah. Kuf chav ches. Meiser sheni. You separate meiser sheni, take it to Shalayim, and eat it. Kuf chav tes. Trumas meiser. Kuf lamed. Meiser ani. Kuf lamed aleph is vidui of that meiser. Kuf lamed gimel, a hafrish challah me arisa seinu velitna lekayim. Separate the challah and give it to a kayim. Shenemar reishis arisa seichem challah tarimu truma. It's a mitzvah. Zok the Ramban says there's two mitzvahs. The Ramban says, I agree with the Rambam by certain cases of matanis. For example, a person has a sheep, he has a certain number of sheep, there's a mitzvah called reishis, I guess. When you shear the sheep, you have to give a certain amount of wool to the kohen. It's a mitzvah called reishis, I guess. The Ramban says there, I agree. Take some of the wool and give it to the kohen. There's a question of how much you give, how many sheep you have to have. You give it to the kohen. But the Ramban says, let's take a dough. I have the dough. What do I do now? I separate a piece of what we call challah, as we call the whole loaf the challah, but we separate what the halacha is the challah. And now what just happened? I had a piece of dough that I was not allowed to eat. Why was I not allowed to eat it? Because of something called tevel. Tevel means either grain, or it could be a dough, or it could be peiros, where you have a mitzvah of truma and maasros, and until you separate the truma and maasros, you're not allowed to eat it. So Ramban says, the first thing is you accomplished something. You took away the Isser Tevel. Now I have a piece of dough. What should I do with it? Give it to the kohen. So the Ramban says, why does the Rambam look at this as one mitzvah? I see two mitzvahs. I see a mitzvah called separating and a mitzvah called giving. Now, if somebody were to say to me such an argument, I would have said back, just because there are two steps means that it's two mitzvahs. The Ramban agrees when you bring a carbon, you have many steps. You do the shchita, kabbalas adam, zrikas adam, hefshit, nituach, sreifas abasar. There are many steps. Why does the Ramban feel that here it should be two separate mitzvahs? So the Ramban makes interesting arguments. The Ramban says like this: when I separate the challah from the dough, I'm making the dough mutter b'achila. Is what I'm doing only part of the process of giving the kohen challah? Or do you look at the fact that I'm making the dough mutter b'achila? That's a separate mitzvah. And then there's a mitzvah of what should I do with the challah? Give it to a kohen. I have my grain. Until I'm separating truma, meiser rishain, meiser oni, or meiser sheni, I'm not allowed to eat the grain. When I separate the truma, then the meiser risha, meiser sheni, or meiser oni, I remove the iser tevel. What should I do with it? Truma, give to a kohen. Meiser rishon, give to a levi. So the Ramban says, you're doing two separate things. Separating it is not just a way of being able to get truma to give a kohen, to get challah to give a kohen. I'm accomplishing a separate thing. So the Ramban says, you're going to argue with me, and you're going to say, who says that it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma? Who said it's a mitzvah on its own? Maybe just part of the process. By a karban, you can't eat the meat until you finish the whole hakrava. So Ramban has interesting arguments. So Ramban says, he says, first of all, you read the psukim. Now really, when you read the Ramban carefully, I think the Ramban is actually acknowledging where he thinks the Rambam is coming from. If I was defending the Rambam, I would say, well, read the psukim. It says by Challah, Tarimu truma lahashem. Separate truma from the dough. Reishes harisasechem Challah tarimu truma. You should separate it. Kitrumas geirin kein tarima isa. The mitzvah separated. So where do you see anything else here? So the Ramban says, keep reading. Me reishes harisasechem titnu lahashem truma l'derasechem. I still don't know what you're supposed to do with it. So the Ramban says, but there's another pasuk written by Truma, and there it says, Titin light, give the kohen the Truma, and this is called Truma. So the Ramban is acknowledging why he and the Rambam are having a machlokes. The Rambam says the pasuk only speaks about separating it. It's true that I'm going to figure out what to do with it, because the pasuk calls it Truma, and by Truma of grain, it says, give that to the kohen. So I'm going to take that halach and apply it over here. But when I read the Chumash, I only see one thing, separation, which is what the Rambam writes. Because the Rambam, throughout the Sefer, says mitzvahs, what's counted as mitzvahs. He agrees there are mitzvahs that we know from drushes, from Kabbalah, but in counting mitzvahs, you only look at what's in the Chumash. So the Rambam says in the Chumash is only one thing, separating it. The Ramban writes, the pasuk calls it Truma. The pasuk in the other place says, give Truma to the kohen. The Ramban's lashon is, that's nigla b'kasav. The Ramban, I think, is trying to address the Rambam. That's also called in the pasuk. Because the pasuk says, treat this like Truma. So there it says, give Truma to the kohen. This Truma you also give to the kohen. So Dr. Ramban, I have a question. There's a Gemara in Menachos where the Gemara says a rule when it comes to brachas, birkas ha-mitzvah. When you have a mitzvah that begins and then eventually ends with doing something more. The Gemara there is speaking about a person makes tefillin, or he makes a kesher on the tefillin. He makes the bracha on the tefillin when he wears them. A person makes a sukkah. He makes the bracha when he uses the sukkah. So the Gemara says a rule. Any mitzvah where there are going to be steps, you make the bracha when you complete everything. You make the bracha at the end. So the Ramban says, I have a question. When a person separates challah, do you make a bracha? You make a bracha. There's a bracha in hafroshas challah. L'hafresh challah min ha'isa. Ramban says, why are you making a bracha? You're in the middle. You're separating the challah. You're in the middle. You're going to give it to the kohen. You're finished. Why are you making a bracha b'shas hafroshas challah? The Ramban says that's a proof to me. The mitzvah of hafrosha is a separate mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of nesina, of giving it, that comes into being once I have challah. So when I separate challah, I'm creating challah. What am I doing when I create challah? I'm doing a mitzvah of separating the challah from the rest now becomes mutter, and this is the challah. I completed one mitzvah.
Why is that right from the fact that you don't make a bracha on Messina? I mean, Rashi, don't we say because men have mekabel, they're stuck?
Okay, that's a very good question. Just hold on. It's a very good question. Excellent. So the Ramban says, why do you make a bracha b'shas hafrosha? So the Ramban says that's a proof that hafrosha is a mitzvah by itself. Another proof the Ramban brings. The Ramban says, a kohen, does he separate challah? He also has to separate challah. He's not allowed to eat dough without separating the challah. And what's he doing with the challah? He has a mitzvah to give it away. He doesn't have the mitzvah of giving away challah. There's no mitzvah of giving challah from a kohen to a kohen. The Ramban says, in that case where he's a kohen, he has a mitzvah called hafroshas challah, and there is no mitzvah of nesinas challah. If it's, what is it, a half a mitzvah? If the mitzvah is give a kohen challah, and the kohen is the one who has the isa, then he doesn't have the mitzvah of giving challah. But the din is he has to separate the challah, makes his dough mutter, and then he keeps it. So the Ramban says that's a proof that the mitzvah of hafroshas challah is not just a stepping stone for the mitzvah of giving challah. There's a mitzvah of making the dough mutter, which is independent of the mitzvah of giving challah. It's true, you'll never have the mitzvah of giving challah unless you first separated challah from the dough. But the mitzvah of separating is not dependent on the mitzvah of giving. That's a second proof. Then he has a third proof. A person has a dough. He separates the challah. What does he do with it? If the dough is tahira, it's pure, it doesn't have any tumah, he gives it to a kohen who's tahar, and he eats it. What if the dough is tameh? Bizman hazeh, we treat everything as being tameh. We don't have a paraduma, we're all tameim. But even bizman hamishna, you have a dough that became tameh. What do? You separate challah, and now what do? You burn it. It happens to be that a kohen is allowed to have benefit while it's burning. He could use it as fuel. He could cook something on top of this challah that's burning. But you don't give it to a kohen to eat, you burn it. The Ramban says, if you have challah tmeya, there is no mitzvah of nesinas challah. There's a mitzvah to create it, to separate it, and then you burn it. So the Ramban says, I'm showing you an example that the mitzvah of hafroshas challah, separating challah, can exist without the mitzvah of giving challah. So these are the Ramban's three proofs against the Rambam. You make a bracha b'shas hafrosha, a kohen is mafresh challah, even though he doesn't give challah, and challah tmeya, the Ramban says there's no mitzvah of giving challah tmeya, and still you're mafresh. So it must be that the mitzvah of hafrosha is independent of the mitzvah of nesina. Those are his three proofs. So now the question is, what do we do for the Rambam? So let's first talk about the bracha.
This question is only for Challah?
And by truma. Same thing by truma. Truma tmeya, the same thing as by truma. A kohen has to be mafresh truma. If you have truma tmeya, the halacha is also you burn it. Truma, that's the Mishnah, the Gemara in Shabbos. If you have shemen sreifa, you burn truma tmeya. You don't eat it. And the Ramban assumes, that's the pashas in the Gemara, there's no mitzvahs nesina. So the Ramban is asking, and you make a bracha when you're mafresh truma. Those are the three questions of the Ramban.
Can Rambam hold that this midrabanan to make bracha?
I can't hear you.
Maybe Rambam holds that midrabanan and you make bracha.
The bracha is certainly midrabanan,
Yeah,
but the
but
Ramban's problem is, why do you make a bracha? The Rabbanan were masakin brachas. Again, the Ramban's points are, number one, the Gemara says in Menachos they make the bracha at the end, and secondly, you should only make the bracha if you do the complete mitzvah. You're not going to make a bracha if the completion of the mitzvah is giving it, then if a kohen is mafresh where he's not going to complete the mitzvah, or it's Challah Tumeya where you don't have the second half of the mitzvah, then you don't have the mitzvah.
So you don't make bracha on
You shouldn't make a bracha.
You shouldn't, but you don't. How about the temeh? The temeh you don't make bracha.
We make a bracha. Right, the Ramban writes that. When the Ramban asks the kasha, the Ramban says, we're mafresh Challah Tumeya and we're mavarech. So Ramban is trying to show that we treat it as a mitzvah b'shleimus, and we make a bracha. Those are the three kashas of the Ramban. So really, on the first question, there's another question, which is what Benjamin was asking before. We could ask this question to the Ramban himself. Let's say the Ramban is right. So there's two mitzvahs. If there's two mitzvahs, there should be two brachas. So make a bracha b'shas hafrasha, and make a bracha b'shas nesina. Two independent mitzvahs.
Maybe you wouldn't accept it. Maybe you have
Okay, so that means when we ask this question, what we're really saying is, which is a question that's raised in the Tshuvas HaRashba, there's a tshuva in the Tshuvas HaRashba that's not from him, but it's a tshuva that's there, where he has many instances where you don't make brachas by mitzvahs, and he wants to know why. So he has many different ideas. But this is really a very broad question. By all matnas kahuna, by matnas levia, by matnas aniyim, all matanos, we don't find a bracha. Why isn't there a bracha? So this question is not a question that's the Ramban's problem. He didn't create that problem, but it's still a fair question. Why isn't there a bracha? So we'll take a look there and we'll find different answers. Really, the answer doesn't really make a difference to us. What's important to us? There's no bracha on nesina. Whenever you're giving something away, there's a reason why the Chacham were not misakon a bracha. Some people say because maybe he won't accept it, which is not so simple, because the Pri Chodesh has a question whether or not when you give matanos to a kohen, does he have to accept it? Or can I say to him, I'm giving it to you, whether you like it or not, and I'm yotzei, I'm mekayim my mitzvah. There's a sugya, the Gemara in Gittin, that speaks about nesina bal karchach. Is it called nesina? Is it not called nesina? If a person gives a get, nesina bal karchach works. She's mugareshes. The Gemara says that's an example of nesina bal karchach, shma nesina. When it comes to other halachas, I can't force something upon you. I can't force you to own something. But there are certain places where I don't have to make it your property. I'm just giving it to you. My mitzvah is to give it. You don't want it, don't take it. That's a sugya in Gittin. So the Pri Chodesh has a shaila. When it comes to matnas kahuna, does the kohen have to accept it for me to be yotzei my chiyuv? Or do I say, my obligation is to give it? I gave it. I have intention to be makna. You can have it. You don't want it. You don't want it. That's a question that Achronim discuss. So in this Tshuvas HaRashba, that is one of the answers, which means that there's an assumption that he's making that you're not yaitz if he doesn't take it. That might be an answer. Some give other answers. It's not as nicker that it's a mitzvah. Some say mishulchan gavaya kazachu. It's not coming from me. I'm just delivering it. I made truma. I made challah. It belongs to whom? It's not my private money anymore. So some Rishonim say mishulchan gavaya kazachu. It's not really a gift from me, so you don't make a bracha. Whatever the answer is, let's go back to the Ramban. I'll ask the Ramban and say, two mitzvahs. One gets a bracha, one doesn't. The second one doesn't get a bracha because, whatever reason, take a look and read it yourself. Fine. Now I go back to the Ramban and ask him a question. So what do you want from the Rambam? You're asking a kasha on the Rambam. The Rambam says there's a mitzvah to be mafresh challah and give it to the kohen. There's a mitzvah to be mafresh truma and give it to the kohen. So what do you want? Lefi the Rambam. You're asking a kasha on the Rambam. How could you make a bracha on the hafrasha? You're in the middle. So what should happen? Because you're asking a kasha. If the Rambam is right, then the Chachamim should have said what? So the Ramban can't be asking that they should have made the bracha later, because whatever the Ramban's problem is the Rambam's problem. If the Ramban agrees that I can't make a bracha when I give it, for whatever reason you like, then the Rambam will say, I agree with you. So that's not an option. So it would come out in the Ramban's kasha, you'd have to say, the Ramban would say there should be no bracha. That just like by other matanos, you give reishis agez. So there's no bracha. So if there's no bracha, don't make a bracha at all. So the Ramban must be asking on the Rambam, there should be no bracha at all. So now the question is, what's the Rambam's answer?
Sorry, just very confused. By Bedirat Chametz, also it's a middle, we make bracha of Bedirat Chametz, I mean Bir Chametz.
Very good question.
And then...
Very good question. It's a very good question. It's not the topic of today's shir. But it's a very good question. Right, it's a very good question.
You make bracha.
Right, now, the question, right, the shaila over there is the, it's the middle, but it's really the beginning.
But at the end,
Right, well, right, is the nusach habracha is beer chametz, which the Rishonim ask, why is the nusach on beer chametz? So some Rishonim say, because bedika is the haschalas habir. So that's a little bit different than these other examples. If somebody were to say hafroshas challah, you can't say hafroshas challah is the beginning of nesina. You could say hafroshas challah leads to nesina. Bedikas chametz, the Rishonim look at it as the beginning of the process of getting rid of my chametz. So they're looking at that as one thing. So you're right, I'm making the bracha not in the middle, I'm making it at the beginning. The question is, where's the beginning? Is the beginning when I throw it into the fire? Is the beginning when I make the fire? Or is the beginning when I find the chametz to put into the fire? So that case, I think, is different than all the other cases, because it's really almost like one long action of ridding myself of chametz.
is the raya to Ramban or Kash to Ramban? Is the raya to Ramban? Ramban said the nusach of the bracha should be accomplished without the mitzvah, and all of the Rishonim over there say, I don't make bracha because bedika is not accomplishment. Pure chametz is accomplishment. The bracha is the nusach of the accomplishment.
Right. The question only is that if
Again, is the raya to Ramban?
the reason why that case is different is because over there, if I look at the bedika as the beginning of the beer, it's like if somebody were to ask, if I throw the chametz into the fire, should I make a bracha when it's burnt, or should I make a bracha when I throw it in? If we would, there are those who hold you can make a bracha if you didn't make it before, you can make it then. So if I were to ask you, do you make it when you throw it into the fire, or when it's burning, when it's completely burnt? When you're dealing with something which is really a process, so the tchila v'saif is not really the same as the Gemara and Menachos and the Ramban. Because the Ramban is not saying tchila v'saif. The Lashon Gemara Menachos is kol sheyesh ma'isa acher. If I'm doing a ma'isa mitzvah, but there's another ma'isa that's a follow-up, so make it on the second one. I think that the Rishonim understand by Bir Chametz, it's not considered another ma'isa, it's just a continuation, whatever I started with. So even though I started checking my house for chametz, but if that's the action of removing the chametz from my house, so you don't look at it as I'm doing this now and that later. I'm doing the exact same thing, even though it may take me hours. So what's the Rambam's response to Challah?
One more question, general question to understand better. I once asked Rabbi Chaim, there were 3,000 halachot which were lost.
Nishtakach, yeah.
And then,
The Echzira Slim Beknas Bekapula, yeah.
so you see that you have 613 mitzvot, but we have thousands of mitzvot. So why can't
That's halachas.
Is that mitzvot?
No, they're halachas. They're not mitzvahs. They're all halachas.
Halachot were forgotten.
It says halachas. That's the Lashon of Gemara.
Yeah, but the halachot also.
Well, they're in the mitzvahs. Every mitzvah is made up of countless halachas. Because if I ask you what a tefillin, how many halachas are there in Hilchos tefillin? So there's many halachas in Hilchos tefillin. The halachas of the batim, of the ritzuas, of the ksav, of the klaf. There's so many halachas there. They're all halachas in Hilchos tefillin, but there's only one mitzvah called, or two mitzvahs, Shal Yad and Shal Rosh. So in the Rambam, the question is, what is the Rambam's response? So here you have a very unusual situation. I don't make a bracha on matanos, so don't make a bracha. That's the Ramban's argument. But I am doing a hafrasha. There's no reason not to make a bracha on hafrasha. The only reason not to is, like the Gemara says in Menachos, because there's something else coming later. So this is, I think, is the Rambam's response. The Rambam's response is, there is no precedent, there's no dogma in the Gemara like this case. In the Gemara's case, I have a Maisa later which could have a bracha. Here I have a Maisa later which can't have a bracha. So your choices are no bracha on the first Maisa, or have a bracha on the first Maisa. So to me it seems in the Rambam, the answer would be that the Rambam is saying the Kollel is only applicable where, for example, I'm going to make a sukkah and later I'll sit in the sukkah. So when I sit in the sukkah, I'll make leishav a sukkah, and that will cover everything. So whenever you have eventually the final Maisa with its bracha, it covers from beginning to end. Over here you have an unusual situation. I can't make a bracha at the end. If I can't make a bracha at the end, then the Rambam, I think, would argue with the Ramban and say that you need a bracha on the hafrashas challah. Now, the Ramban's problem is, if the hafrashas challah typically can't have a bracha, the fi Rambam, then you should not have a bracha. Chazal should not make a takana. So you have a very unique situation where the tchila is the only place you can make a bracha, the first maisa. The second maisa can't have a bracha. Is there a rule for this? So there's really no Gemara that says it beferish. The Ramban says there is, and the Rambam says there isn't. That's what comes out to me is the machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban. Now the Ramban has a kasha from a kohen who's mafresh. So the shaila here is, how does the Rambam address this? Now everybody's in agreement. A kohen doesn't have to give away truma and challah. He just keeps it. How do I understand that? The Torah said to Klal Yisrael, give kohanim truma and challah. And the Torah told Klal Yisrael, you're not allowed to eat tevel until truma is taken and challah is taken. The kohanim are also listening. What do the kohanim hear? Nobody's allowed to eat tevel until you separate truma and challah. That everybody heard. The kohanim also heard the truma and challah is supposed to be given to kohanim. So when if I was a kohen, I'm separating truma and I'm separating challah. So I'm doing what everybody else is doing. Now that I separate it and I have truma and I have challah, do I look at it that automatically there's a kiyum of giving it to a kohen and a truma and challah? Or there is no mitzvah of giving truma and challah? Now, it's almost like an academic shaila. It's going to happen automatically. As soon as the kohen separates the truma and the challah, it's his. Now, if I were to break it down, I would say, really what's happening is like this. When you make challah and truma, who does challah and truma belong to? It belongs to all the kohanim, until one kohen gets his hands on it. As soon as a single kohen gets his hands on the truma and challah, it's now his private property. But until that point, if I'm a Yisrael and I separate challah and truma, who owns this? The Gemara in Chulin discusses mazik matnes kahuna is mamen she'ein le'ta'ivim. It belongs to all the kohanim in the world. So nobody can take me to court. So if I destroy truma, there's nobody who can force me to pay, because who's taking me to court? Mr. Cohen walks in and says, I'm a kohen. So I said, so what? So is my neighbor, who says, I'm giving it to you. I'm going to give it to him. You can't force me to give it to you. So there's no single kohen that could ever force me to give it to him. Now there's a kohen who happens to have it, because he's the one who was mafresh the truma and mafresh the challah. So it instantly becomes his private truma, his private challah. So do I look at that as a kiyum of titain lei? Now the Ramban's argument is, you can't tell me that the kohen has a mitzvah to give it to a kohen, and I'll give it to myself. That's the Ramban's argument. Now, I don't know what to say in the Rambam. Is the Rambam saying there's a mitzvah on a kohen, and it's just going to happen automatically, or the Rambam's going to say what the Torah wants, which is it should end up in the hands of a kohen, is going to happen. It's going to happen automatically. So it's not that you have half the mitzvah. The second half of the mitzvah, it's not that it's not being said by a kohen. We already have the accomplishment of the second half of the mitzvah, which is it should end up by a kohen. So whatever the Torah wants, you're going to have automatically. So there's no necessity to give a mitzvah. And therefore the Rambam will say in this kind of a case, of course you make the bracha b'shas hafrasha. It's the same mitzvah. The intent of the mitzvah, the Rambam has a very interesting lashon when he writes the mitzvah. The mitzvah is lahafresh challah me'arisasenu velitno l'kayin. That's the lashon. You mafresh it and give it to the kohen. That's talking to us. Now, if I'm a kohen and I'm mafresh it, so the kohen will say it's already been delivered. So can I say I did the mitzvah? That's hard to say, that a kohen did a mitzvah by giving it to himself and accepting it himself. But is what the Torah wants accomplished? The answer is yes. So to me, it seems that this is the machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban. The Ramban is saying you can't justify having a mitzvah called hafrasha if the second half, lamaisa, nobody's obligated to do. And I think the Rambam is saying if the result is going to be what the other mitzvah would accomplish, which is giving to a kohen, so you have what the Torah described without anybody actually having to give the challah. That's this on the second question. The third one is a more difficult one. When you mafresh challah tumeya from an isa that's tameh, so Ramban says there's no mitzvah, you just put it into the fire. That's Ramban's argument. Now the Ramban has a strong argument, but there's really a kasha from a Gemara on this Ramban, which the Mayna Chachma asked. There's a Gemara in Psachim that speaks about being mafresh challah on Pesach. If a person wants to be mafresh challah from dough on Pesach. Now we don't do these kind of things. We'll bake everything before Pesach. But a person makes a dough on Pesach, and he wants to bake himself matzah. What do you do with the challah? You're going to separate the challah. The dough is tameh, the Mishnah says. That means nobody could eat it. So I'm going to separate dough. It's Pesach, and dough becomes chametz. How do I stop it from becoming chametz? I want to bake it. It's yontif. You're allowed to bake on yontif. You're allowed to bake on yontif if somebody's eating it. Well, who's eating it? There's nobody who can eat it, because you can't eat challah that's tameh. So what's the eitzah? So the Mishnah in Psachim discusses how to get around it. In that discussion, the Gemara says there's a machlokes tanoim. One Tana says just separate the challah, put it away, and don't worry about it. It's going to become chametz. So the Gemara says he holds it doesn't belong to anybody, any individual person. It's not mine. I made it challah. It's no individual kohen's, so there's nobody here who has a problem with chametz. It doesn't belong to anybody, any individual person. And the other Tana, what's his problem? So his problem, the Gemara says, is there's something called toives hana. Toives hana means if I have the right to decide which kohen to give my matanos to, that's something that has value, because a kohen may, or a Yisrael who has a grandson who's a kohen, may pay me to give this to his grandson who's a kohen. So that has monetary value. That gives me ownership in the challah. It's not mine, I can't eat it, but I control who to give it to. So the Gemara says, toives hana mamain, that's considered you own it, and therefore you have a problem of bayirah by emotzei of chametz. That's what the Gemara says. So the question is, this is challah that's tameh. Is there a mitzvah of giving challah that's tameh to a kohen? If there's no mitzvah of giving it to a kohen, like the Ramban says, then what do you mean I have toives hana? I can decide which one to give it to. There's no mitzvah to give it. Just throw it in the fire. So that Gemara is mashma that even by challah that's tameh, which he can't eat, but he can burn it and derive hana while it's burning, it's masha from the Gemara, there's a mitzvah of nesina. So I don't know if that's the answer for the Rambam. It's a kasha that the Mayan HaChochma, it's a sefer Mayan HaChochma asks on the Ramban, that he thinks is a raya from the Gemara that by Challah Tumah it is a mitzvah giving to a kohen. He won't eat it, but he can use it. So that might be the answer for the Rambam, possibly. Okay, that's some question. That's some things to think about Hilchos Challah. It's interesting that the Svarna writes that Klal Yisrael was given the mitzvah of Challah here. Acher chet hameraglim hitzrach gam hachallah laman yiu re'uyim shetochel bracha b'bateihem. Why was the mitzvah of Challah given at this point? Because after the chet hameraglim, Klal Yisrael needed more schuyas. So what's the schus that they need? To have bracha in their homes. So how do you have bracha in your homes? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them a mitzvah of Challah. V'reishis harisaseichem titnu lakayin lahaniach bracha el beisecha. By being mafresh Challah to give to the kohen, that brings bracha into my home. If my home, in my house, what's in my house is not only for myself, but it's also for the kohen. The kohen is the Mesharis Hashem. The kohen for Klal Yisrael are the ones who represent the Oiskim in the Mikdash. I bring bracha into my own home. Whenever we have any davar shebekdusha in our home, we bring bracha into our home. The Gemara tells us when we had a Beis HaMikdash, the lechem hapanim brought bracha to Klal Yisrael's lechem. Everything that was done in the Beis HaMikdash brought bracha. We brought menachos, there was bracha for the grain. We brought nesachim, bracha for the shemen, bracha for the yayin, bracha for the behemoths. Everything in the Beis HaMikdash was a source of bracha for everything in our lives. Whenever we have a davar shebekdusha, that spills over and brings bracha into our lives. Because manenu, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but we have limud HaTorah. And limud HaTorah is the biggest source of bracha that we can have in our homes. If a person makes the time to learn, a person has time to learn whether it's in a Beis HaMedrash or in his home, but he brings Kedusha into his life, into his home, then the bracha is nespashet in every aspect of his life. It's bracha for him personally, bracha for his family, bracha for his bayis. Every aspect of the person is nisbarech from the Kedusha that we bring into our lives. Baruch Hashem, it's a beautiful maimet to have people come to hear a shir, something very, very special. The schus HaTorah is a schus that Klal Yisrael has its Yanika from. Our whole Shmira is from this. Our whole Chiyas is from this. And both the Hachzakas HaTorah and the Limud HaTorah is the biggest power, the biggest koyach that we have. Yud Beis.